Longevity science has advanced rapidly, but access to it is still limited. Most people either don't know what to do or they get fragmented care that stops the moment they leave a clinic. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Seeli Hembright, someone building at the intersection of science and real world longevity care. Seeli, really glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, you started in deep science. What pulled you into longevity?
I think it was the accessibility and kind of the democratization of some of the things we were doing. I was more curious about. I was always more curious about applied science. I mean, medicine oftentimes is applied science, or it should be at least. And so we were doing these really interesting things. And I was a traditional academic. I was what's called a PI. I was writing grants and writing manuscripts and directing studies and designing studies, which is fun. But we'd see these really interesting things, and I have several examples, but they really didn't see the light of day for a variety of reasons because some of the machinery is slow, really, in that translational realm where you take science from the bench, if you will, to the bedside in the clinic. And I thought that could be expedited. Honestly, I mean, I guess the simple answer is I'm impatient. It's
Mhm.
probably the easiest answer. And so we also did some studies at my last institution where I helped develop or did develop a blood test where we could test certain cells in blood called senescent cells. And we would do a study and the patients would come in and we'd give them a report that had their data in it for research only. And they were enthralled with it. They wanted to come back and retest and see if they could lower the results and they wanted to
Mhm.
compare to their spouses or whatever. And of course, in the study, you couldn't do that. It's a controlled study. But I realized there was really an appeal and a need and desire for some of these emergent tools, and they're really simple things. And so, really, I like to see that people were interested in some of these emergent technologies or emergent therapies, and that's really the impetus for starting some of these entrepreneurial things that I've been up to lately.
So you mentioned something interesting in your previous conversation that science felt slow. What did you mean by that?
There's a lot of like mud in the gears with getting again some of that science to a commercialized product or out and accessible to people for sure. And there's various reasons for that. I mean, some you could probably appreciate there's bureaucracy in bigger academic institutions, et cetera. But getting sponsorship or money is more difficult. There's a long conversation behind that too, but grants are harder to come by and it's very fickle. So there's just things that are slow, but more importantly, there's some simple things that the generally the public doesn't seem to appreciate or know about that aren't talked about as much that are because they're cheap and off label oftentimes that work really really well. And so, like, part of it was pushing some things forward in a different setting and getting some research or science to the market, but also, again, like the education element and democratization element. I'll give you like two examples. One was this is my dissertation, which was felt like 50 years ago at this point. I studied Alzheimer's disease in
Yeah.
mice. And we could genetically modify these mice. We call them transgenic mice, and we can give them these genes that spit out these proteins that are found in humans that have Alzheimer's disease. And they'll accumulate those proteins and they'll have the same symptoms that humans do, generally speaking. And so we could make those mice really sick. And then I used a genetic mouse to manipulate some enzymes that were really important in reducing oxidative stress, specifically in neurons. And that worked really, really well. It's an interesting technique and tool. But what we also did was we tried different therapies that are over the counter that could also reduce oxidative stress. And the idea was let's use those as a control comparator, and generally speaking, they work just as well as this genetic modification. And the tool we used in this case was vitamin E. I studied lipid peroxidation. Vitamin E significantly reduces lipid peroxidation. Lipid peroxidation is driving neurodegeneration. And we could use this simple compound and give it to a really compliant patient, which is a mouse, because they can't go anywhere and they'll take the drugs when they're supposed to. And it worked brilliantly. And that was a long time ago, but it really highlighted to me that let's not give up on some of these simple either lifestyle therapies or holistic therapies or just, over the counter, easy to access therapies that really can move the needle to some degree. I'm not saying vitamin E is going to cure Alzheimer's disease, but there's been several studies and trials that really show some positive benefits. So as an augmentation tool, things like that are great. So that was a good example. And then I was doing things at my previous institution as a PI where we were trying to reduce senescent cells. I had that blood test I described where we could detect senescent cells. Could we use drugs to reduce those cells and make people healthier in theory? And one of the drugs we used was called Fisetin, and we published on this. This is all publicly available, and it's certainly a hot topic right now. But this is a senolytic drug, and this is a natural flavonoid compound with potent senolytic activity that's very safe. It's very cheap. I mean, you can't patent it. It's probably why it's not so widely prescribed, and it worked brilliantly. And again, it's not the sole answer, but it worked really, really well. We studied this in an orthopedic setting, so we cared about the efficacy of orthopedic care and biologic care, and it seemed to really augment that quite well. So those are some examples of, throughout my process or throughout my training that I realized, like, man, this should really be seeing the light of day. People should be
Mm.
knowing about this. And it is starting to see the light of day. There's Senolytics are starting to catch fire for sure. But yeah, it's just slow. Sometimes scientists are doing science to do science, and and this is my soapbox. I don't want to get too detailed, but people are there's a mechanism or a wheel you have to kind of fit into. You got to write the grant to do the science, but then write the other grant to get more science that adds up and stacks along with what you've done before, and it gets a little, again, too muddy in the gears. It's a little slower for my liking.
State longevity in Aspen was your first move, a physical wellness studio bringing those protocols to people directly. What did you learn from running that, and what surprised you about going from a lab to an actual clinic?
Business entrepreneurship is a completely different language. And in fact, they really should teach some of these things in graduate school, I think, but at least an idea about it, like how to commercialize something. But there's a big gap between what's commercially viable and what's scientifically viable, obviously.
Mm.
And the need for people in the marketplace is very different, obviously, in a clinical setting too, where there's more urgent need generally. And then just running a business as a whole is difficult. I mean, I've never had to think about, hiring and personnel and payroll, et cetera. So those small things are funny too. But I think in regards to like longevity science and what people are, need and what's appealing, I think that the things I learned early on were to really simplify everything. So I really approached it in the beginning, and this is a good lesson I think for other people that are leaving kind of the science world, if you will, or research world and applying it, is that no one knows, and generally they don't really care either about the complexities of the esoteric elements of what you're trying to accomplish. You have to simplify that. To
Before.
simplify that in the marketing, to simplify that when you're talking to clients or patients, and you have to simplify the protocols and how they're going to use it in their daily lives. If it's for example, it's an infusion therapy with some other holistic therapies. What
Mm.
people really want is their hands held. They want a trusted expert to help walk them through that, and they really rely on you for that knowledge. But they're not interested, in the deep level science that I might be
Mm.
interested in. So one of the mistakes we had a whole science page, and I put all kinds of work into organizing the evidence based approaches that we were
Mm.
using, and I still stand by that and still do. I like doing that, but no one cared. It's funny. They just trusted, me, or we have a medical director as well. They trusted, her, obviously, which is good and bad. So I think when you make that jump, you have to think about the economics, which is incredibly important
Right.
because that's important for business. That's something you don't have to do in science generally, or in a research lab. And you have to simplify things a lot. And
Mhm.
that's a good thing. It's a good exercise too. I think we can always benefit from that in life as a whole, just simplifying what you're trying to accomplish, quick pitches. So that was a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, that could be valuable for someone who is starting off now and trying to figure out the difference from moving from a lab to a clinical kind of a setup. That you described a problem with Bay State, a transient population. People fly into Aspen, they get the IV drip, the hyperbaric session, the diagnostic, and then they fly home, and the
Mhm.
care stops.
Yes.
Tell me about that problem and how did you manage to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a good idea of how to address it. I think it'll work. But this is a problem. I think this is an issue. I mean, really, you could expand this out. This is kind of an issue with lots of medical care as a whole. It's certainly an issue in the wellness sector, and it's amplified here in our town for sure. I mean, we live in a small resort town. We have a location here. It's a very seasonal resort town as well, and transient, like you just mentioned. And so, like, as you can imagine, if you really want to tackle longevity or health span optimization or anything, I mean, this is really a programmatic combinatorial approach that takes time and it takes adherence to these protocols and a really an elongated continuation of care. So that population that's here that are kind of transient, that doesn't service them very well. And we noticed that pretty quickly. And we didn't, and believe it or not, this seems like an obvious thing. We didn't think about that in the beginning.
Mm.
That was actually because we built out these longitudinal programs, but then, oh yeah, they're only here half the year, or they're just here on a ski trip or something. And so there's lots of ways to kind of like bridge that gap. You can have an app and you can drop ship some things, sure. But you really need like a foundational tool or platform to really kind of solve those problems where you can engage with the client and check in, have the toolkit kind of under one umbrella where you're virtually meeting with them. You have drop ship ability for testing requirements or any kind of therapeutics or prescriptions, maybe blood draws. And so what we did was we created a telemedicine company. It's called Frame Longevity. It's
Mhm.
different than Bay State here for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is we have ambitions to do regenerative medicine clinics elsewhere. That's my background. I'm a stem cell biologist.
Same longevity you launched last month, right?
Yeah. And so that's going well. We're growing in patient number, but of course now it's growing into like a venture that has very unique kind of
So,
objectives, but solve that problem of like the people that we're leaving here, and we can have a
so
platform
tell
for
me
them.
what frame longevity is. What does it do and who it really for?
It's a concierge medicine approach for optimized longevity, but with a very regenerative medicine heavy focus. So we call it regenerative longevity. And so again, my background's in stem cell biology, but we have two of my partners are surgeons that use regenerative medicine techniques consistently. One's a spine surgeon, one's a cosmetic surgeon, and there's me. But interestingly, the tools that they would use in their practice, even though it's a very different people, are very similar.
Mhm.
The operational needs are very similar. So our idea is to have clinics that have a variety of enriched stem cell products or other kind of biologic products for dermatological use and or orthopedic use or pain management use all on one site. And then have the telemedicine or virtual health foundation, which is really a concierge medicine foundation. It allows us to engage with the patient before and after treatment and optimize the efficacy of those therapies. In short, with the problem we see in regenerative medicine as a whole is a very disparate level of efficacy. So there's this big question of why do some people respond to a PRP, for example, or a BMAC, but the other ones don't. And we certainly have an idea about that. And it's mostly related to donor factors. It's related to your own health. How healthy are you before you get your own treatment of these biologics? And so if you have a standardized protocol pre-procedure, which we can do, in this telehealth platform helps do that. And you have a standardized protocol for the injection or the actual therapy delivery itself. And you have a standardized protocol following that therapy, whether it's a PT regimen or it's some pharmaceuticals, et cetera, or maybe some peptides, you will significantly increase the efficacy of those therapeutics. So again, like that engagement with the virtual health allows us to really control that patient journey to improve outcomes or efficacy for these treatments and give them what they need where they're at, which is at home or wherever they're traveling.
You also mentioned being able to ship things to patients' home,
Mhm.
therapeutics, peptides, off-label drugs that target aging nodes.
Yep.
That's a meaningful shift in how longevity care gets delivered. What does the infra look like and how did you build it?
Yeah. First of all, I feel like this is what everyone people are starting to expect this at this point. I
Mm.
think this is the future of especially primary care medicine. I
Wellness.
really, I mean, obviously, and there's a lot of tools that we could take advantage of that we do that allow us to organize that and get things to where they need to go. I will say we're not a technology company. We're providers. We
Right.
leveraged pre-existing tools, but the curation, organization, and kind of medical management is where we come in. But to be more specific, we have our EHR, which is great. This is our, electronic health record system that we do all our meetings through and keep the patient records in. And then we work with preferred vendors that allow us to drop ship either testing kits or blood work kits or even prescriptions to their home. The problem, if you're curious, that you run into in this space is there's not one vendor that can do all things. So you
Mm.
have to have 3 or 4 pharmacies that you trust that obviously meet FDA standards and that could compound properly. so that you have the complete menu of options you need. Because we have a lot of things that we either prescribe or test, et cetera, as you can imagine. So you have to work with multiple pharmacies and you have to work with multiple blood test vendors at times. There's different tools for that. Even for the testing, there's different vendors that have different testing. That can create some organizational chaos. I think we're trying to create tools on our end that blend those better using AI. This is where AI, I think, is really helpful. Are these
Mhm.
organizational elements? I think AI in healthcare and AI being a doctor is controversial and a different conversation, but helpful. But anyway, so we have to blend those tools together to get them what they need. Yeah, and it takes multiple vendors. But the main point is we rely on trusted vendors to do that. Like if we do a certain type of genetic testing, I have vetted that this company's works very, very well. The literature supports what they're doing. They can ship in a timely manner. So we do a lot of vetting beforehand. But there's a lot of organization behind that. I think that stops, in my humble opinion, I think that stops other companies from doing a vast array of menu options for testing
Mhm.
and for at home kind of services. So,
Mm.
but we put the time and effort into really constructing all those vendors. So we have a vast menu of options that really can fit that client's needs.
So glad that you touched upon AI. We'll come to that. But before that, one thing I wanted to ask is what does approach looks like for a patient?
I think this is the future as well, and these virtual health tools really allow this to shine. But the real initial, I guess, seed of an idea came from honestly my time as a researcher, as a clinical research principal investigator. And we when you do a clinical trial, the easiest way to think about it is you have like, a baseline setting for patients that have X, Y, or Z problems. You have a baseline testing, baseline assessment, then you track them longitudinally over time. And you have, per the trial, you have what are called interventions that you use. It could be a drug or a procedure or something. And then you have outcome measures, which is basically these measures that allow you to see, is this working? You also have endpoints that are similar, but so you basically have testing and you have tracking, and it's very organized. So it's
Comparison.
programmatic. And the reason that works really well is because you're decreasing the variables, you're hitting a specified target. Often in clinical trials, it's a much more specific target, but we can apply that concept to general wellness and longevity care. So, for example, someone might come in and say, I'm 33 years old, new dad, used to be an athlete. Now I'm not. I feel like I'm bigger. I'm not keeping on weight. What do I do? We would then approach that in a targeted way, in a programmatic way, and start with a bunch of measurements from blood work, which is normal. But we have a vast array of markers we can look at. We'd focus on hormone health and insulin regulation. And then we could build out an interventional plan for that person. And over time, we can use those interventions and track routinely, and get their bio data back, and we can in real time see if this is working. This sounds simple, but people aren't doing this very well because you might be like, well, it's iterative. So it's not just a pre planned 1 year thing. It's might be 1 year, but
Until
we're going to pivot and we're going to pare down the blood testing and be like, your key markers that are really changing here that seem to be moving the needle for you, we're going to hone in on that. So we're learning over time with that client. So it's an iterative process. So they can really have a really specific and personalized protocol that's based on their physiology, their needs, their goals. And I think that is honestly where AI helps too. But that's
yeah,
also what makes us a little bit different. And I think part of it is we're kind of informed on these things. We're kind of like curious and nerdy about this stuff as a team. And so, like, because most approaches in this space, it's kind of a one size fits all kind of approach. It might be quote unquote programmatic, but it's like, here's your drugs on this schedule, yada yada yada. We'll do blood work once a year, yeah, something like that. So we can really, really fine tune it, and again, learn throughout the process from that patient. Because we have good responders and not so good responders, right? And so we have to change a little bit what we're doing. Everyone's different. So it's a very personalized concierge approach that takes time, but it's much more effective.
and I want to talk about AI because you mentioned you drew an interesting line that AI for efficiency in back office, yes, but AI replacing the human provider relationship, no. Tell me more about where you have seen AI that actually works versus where you think that it doesn't work.
Yeah, and some of this is just kind of a philosophical like maybe difference or feel, if you will. Like I think there's differences of opinion on some of these things, to be honest. So like some of the things I'll say are just my opinion because like we're really leaning heavily into to retaining that human element in healthcare. That doesn't mean we can't use tools to make things more organized, efficient, or better for the client. But I have found because one thing I've found the last few years that really resonates with people is I think is talking again to the expert, but actually talking to the person, not a
Mhm.
bot or something or they just I think that's the case in healthcare because this is a very intimate thing. This is people's health. And we're not, we're not oncologists. We're not, this is not life-threatening things we're doing. I get it. But it's still people's healthcare. And they're still sharing their struggles to some degree, right? And sharing their goals. And it's just a very intimate setting. And I think that human element there is really appreciated, really important. And I think we see better responders, or I would say more adherent patients to protocols because they're talking to a qualified provider. And so we have nurses and physicians and me, depends on, we plug and play. But there's key nodes in that programmatic process where we make sure that we have a human introduction and a human kind of consult as part of our concierge care. And so that's my kind of philosophy is that a lot of these tools that are emerging, they're trying to replace that with AI. And by the way, open evidence and even ChatGPT's new healthcare modality, that they work brilliantly. They're actually really great. I always recommend patients, like if you have blood work, throw it in there. A really great response. It's pretty good, but that's not the need we have. That's not the need the patient has. The patient wants to talk to someone to get the positive feedback, to have the accountability, and to have that human interaction with this kind of like intimate need that they have. And so again, yeah, so we really try to like lean heavily into that. And that is concierge medicine in many ways. We're accessible and we're there. If there's an empathy element that obviously AI is not going to have. And so, yeah, we think that's really important because others are doing it differently. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but we just feel strongly about that. But, these enterprise tools, I mean, even, Claude's doing great in the enterprise space, obviously. I mean, Cowork's amazing. So we can we leverage that heavily to help us to organize and be more efficient in the back office side of things. And honestly, even with the right now, we're currently building out. We're working with a company called Brain One, for example, that has an application that we're building out together and working on this. But I think it'll work well, where we could have essentially a health or data vault for these individuals. Another problem that we see is patients have data from their doctors here, 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 and here. There's portals everywhere. They don't know how to get to
Mm.
them. It's all clunky. Again, we kind of want to own that functional medicine, a wellness area for them. So we can create an AI based tool that can take all that disparate data really well. It actually works great at this. Or whether it's a PDF or some Excel file that has random things in it, or if it's a picture of something or some imaging,
Mm.
it does a great job of consolidating that, and it
Mm.
gives us, the providers, the summary, key points, and then we still control the narrative of what they're seeing. We'll never rely on AI to spit out to them what they should do. Other people are doing this. We don't believe in that, honestly, but we can use AI to get us to the goal line, if you will. And so then we can review that and say, hey, and it creates really great visual tools for us. In this case, what I'm talking about, it's an application they can use on their phone and everything's stored in one place, organized in one place, and they can track trends over time. There's great visual tools that are inherent in there. So we love that, but still we want to make sure that we can control the narrative and recommendations, and include that human element for sure.
I think you're touching upon on something that the healthcare industry often gets wrong. It leads with replacement rather than augmentation. In my work with AI partners, what I've seen is that the most durable AI implementations are the ones where AI handles pattern recognition, workflows, scale, growth, and the human handle judgment, empathy, and relationship. What you also described there. What would it mean for longevity if the AI could surface the right protocol recommendations to your provider before every patient interaction? So the human could spend 100% of the time on the relationship rather than the research.
Yeah, that I generally agree with that. That's kind of what I was trying to explain. That was a good elegant description. We want to use it to get us mostly there and better understand. I mean, it's a great analysis and generally a great interpretation tool. And you're spot on. If we can use that to reduce the time it's required to really kind of survey all these things, It gives us more time to add that human element. And
Mhm.
it's a really great way of putting it. I mean, and then that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I do think that's commercially viable. I think it's
Mhm.
very appealing. I think that's what people want to see. We're trying to really
Mhm.
promote that. I have noticed here and in other positions as well that that's really, really sought after,
Mhm.
especially that expert time. Um, even if you're not really an expert, it's funny. We almost get too much credit, People will talk to me and they'll write things down. And it's like, hey, by the way, what I'm saying is in research right now. We're still trying to figure this out. There's good evidence. This is not the answer. I promise. And another thing you mentioned, which is so common, and this is not related to AI, but just a general and just thing that we've seen and it seems to happen a lot, is this kind of silver bullet approach. There's like a top 3 or 5 things I see constantly. One is this kind of silver bullet idea, like what's the newest, greatest thing? Give it to me now. And people will, it's peptides, right? So it's like, well, first of all, peptides is a huge class of things and drugs. But there's not a silver bullet, is the main take home. There's not one approach. That's why we do programmatic medicine, because it's combinatorial. You have to augment other things, like you mentioned, and you have to use various different approaches because you have various different targets. Aging is a result of various different things going haywire. We know what those are, and we're still learning how to fix it. But it's a multimodal combinatorial approach. So I have a lot of conversations with people that want to try this new exosome infusion therapy. It's going to cure everything, and that's not the case. And the people that are making those claims at those companies that say it's the case, those are the bad actors that we try to avoid. But yeah,
And the market data right now is like striking. AI in healthcare is projected to grow to 600 billion by 2034. But in longevity, most of that investment is in drug discovery and biotech, not really in the care delivery layer. Is there a
yeah,
gap, you think, between science advancing and care delivery keeping up to that?
there is. I mean, you're exactly right. I see this all the time. So we're fundraising for whenever you start a company, you got to raise money a little bit too, right? So this is my third company. So I've been fundraising a decent amount the last few years. And even for this new company, we're in the process of fundraising. And I mention that because when I'm talking to people, whether it be like VC people, some PE people, we're too early for that, but like I still talk to them. Even angel investors, to your point, they are really hung up on the next big drug. And you know the reason for that. I know you know why that's happening because of all the GLPs that have just emerged. I mean, Eli Lilly is going to just I think take over almost. It seems like because in many ways, quite frankly, to be honest, these are kind of miracle drugs in many ways. I'm not actually against GLPs. I think GLPs are actually fairly brilliant and work great in the right patient. So it's a wonderful pharmacological approach. It's a great drug. But the commercial success of that, the ease of making that, the ease of distributing that, that's where these investors and that's where everyone seems to be focused. The resources are going that direction. And like we just talked about, although GLPs and this class of GLPs, if you there's various different ones, obviously, Retta's coming out soon-ish that has multiple different agonists there. I think it's just distracted from what's really the core for the efficacy effect in these patients, which is again is this kind of like more longitudinal care. So you're exactly right. I don't know what the answer is, but I definitely see this. Everyone is focused on the miracle drug. And again, it goes back to my silver bullet argument earlier where I see this a lot. It's definitely in the zeitgeist, and I think it's a flawed way of thinking, honestly. People care
Mhm.
about the technology or the devices that are cool, the drug that is cool. Those are great, but the care element is very important, and we'd like to say, for us at least, our overarching goal is to create an environment or a clinic to do R&D on these biologic therapeutics and improve them in-house because that's really where the direction for research is going too, I think. Some of the best work now is coming out of the private sector more than it is like academia. And so we can really do that. But they want to see that result now. They want to invest into the result. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't you bring up a great point. You're exactly right, in my opinion. I don't know what the answer is, but
Mhm.
there's certainly, I think, an over focus
Mhm.
onto the drug discovery and even devices in the device world. Same thing. They want to see this product that does this thing. It's not one thing that's going to work, generally speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
So frame longevity launched last month. Let's fast forward 3 years. What does success looks like there in concrete terms? How many patients? Any geological footprints, and what does the care model have evolved into?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main goal in 3 years, it'd be great to have our own on-site clinics. That's really what we're fundraising for. That's what, we need to build those out. And we have some great ideas in that space. So in a few years, it'd be wonderful to have our telemedicine foundation that's very efficient. Again, we don't really think of ourselves as a telemedicine company. We're doing that now, but we think about virtual health as the foundational engagement mechanism for what we're doing on site and what we're developing on site, honestly. So a success for us in a few years, and I think this will certainly happen, is to have a series of clinics that allow us to do these vanguard regenerative medicine therapies and learn there and iterate there and improve our own standard of care. There's even IP behind some of that improvement in standard of care, which is great commercially or from a business perspective. And then have again the virtual health concierge arm in the background. Because what we know as a group is that if we can improve and standardize, again, that pre-procedure protocol, the treatment protocol, and the post-procedure protocol, we will get better outcomes than everyone else that's trying to do this. We know this. We're very confident. And we think we know what those protocols are. And once we do that, and the reason we're excited about that is if that's working well and we can make claims that we are doing better, here's how. We can show that scientifically. We can then develop the things we're curious about in the regen med space, which is a long story. But we have a device we're working on, for example. It's a bone marrow derived therapeutic device. It looks really, really great in preclinical studies. We can do interesting things to biologics with sound and different kind of augmenting compounds. It's a long conversation, but different states will allow us to do that too, which is nice. So success in a few years would be having multiple clinics in different areas that's really driven by the regulatory landscape that allows us to do interesting things with allogeneic and autologous cells and really push the envelope. Our goal is to evolve medicine. We're not just trying to pump out a drug or a service. We would do that, but we really want to iterate and evolve these practices because we're curious and we want to take this evidence-based approach to doing that. So you can't do that without the on-site clinics, right? Can't ship stem cells to people. You can't do telemed stem cell. So that's the goal. That would be success for us in a few years for sure.
The concierge medicine has historically been expensive and exclusive.
Especially in the digital health, drop ship, at home drug delivery medicine. So, Amazon Health, for example, is making a big play in this space. They bought a series of clinics called One Medical, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure it's One Medical. They spent over $4 billion on trying to own the entire patient journey. So they're buying pharmacies, they're buying the primary care clinics, on-site clinics. And obviously they have the telehealth found the platform that they have, and they'll be able to use that to access the patient. So in one way, it's great. That means we're on the right track. This idea is actually, seems to be a good idea because the big players are doing it. So one might say that's a risk to us. I think it would be ignorant to say that that's not, big brother coming in and trying to do something like this is scary. But we're also really different. I mean, we have experts in this field that are hard to come by in regenerative medicine. You can't do regenerative longevity unless you have these specialized clinics. Those clinics can be expensive and it's an expert level of care, but it's also like an often evolving science behind this too. It's not static. Like
Mm.
if you're gonna treat,
Evolving.
yes, the science is evolving, the therapies are rapidly evolving. And they're for two reasons. One, the science itself, we're learning so much more. And two, the regulatory landscape in the states is changing state
Hmm.
by state. They give more allowances to do this and that. So we have more freedom, which is a good thing. But if you're treating diabetes, I mean, we have GLPs we just talked about, but diabetes it's a little more of a standard care mechanism. You know what you're targeting, you know what you have to bring down, you know what to measure and track, weight, insulin, fasting glucose. Regenerative medicine is too chaotic at the moment in a good way. It's ever growing. So when people say, "Hey, there's Big Brother coming in doing something similar," how would you compete? We would say we would compete with the specialized things that we're doing that's complemented with the research and development to make it better on site, and we control that, which is great. So we're optimistic. But yeah, I mean, like your original question was, what's the concern? I mean, we're not the only people thinking about these things. That's for sure.
Mm.
We think we're great. We certainly are. We have a great team. We're very informed, but there's a lot of people in this space. So, differentiating yourself is important. That's marketing and other things. Yeah.
Right. So before I let you go, someone listening to this who is 40, reasonably healthy, not living in Aspen, and genuinely want to start taking longevity seriously, what is the one thing that you would tell them to do in the next 30 days that actually moves the needle?
It's gonna be a boring answer. I get this all the time. I think people want this, like, sexy, like, there's this new exosome that does this crazy thing. It's not. I mean, it's like, I mean, the first thing is advanced blood work. You need to understand your physiology. This sounds simple. Lots of companies are doing this. I would say that some companies aren't doing it in a thorough way, but a really thorough panel with various elements on that panel that target that 40-year-old's needs, and we could talk about that, but everyone's different. Really quickly, what we've learned in longevity science too is that there's inflection points to aging. And there's two critical ones where you start to age at the organ level, at the kind of the transcriptional level, the cellular level. That's around 40 and around 62, 60, 65. We always thought it was 65. Well, now it's changed. We now know that, which is great. So 40 is a great age to start thinking about this. So it's advanced blood work, then it's lifestyle changes. Like you have to, we would assess what they're currently doing, what they're eating, drinking, and how they're moving. And you want to augment that, and that moves. I'm telling you, Geet, that is the thing that moves the needle the most. I know that
If
we're a business that sells services and things. The answers are super basic. And I've told several people like that are in poor health, for example, like, why don't you call back after you've been walking 3 miles a day for 3 months and drinking more water and drinking very little alcohol, just stuff like that. And then they're primed to really be optimized. A lot of things we do are optimization tactics and tools, all these peptides that we can use and these new therapies and off-label drugs and senolytics, et cetera. Those work best in a good physiological setting or or an optimized physiological setting. So we got to get you there first. So the answer is, depending on the person, is really simple lifestyle things and then start the optimization tools. But blood work is so important. I scream about this all the time. People don't get blood work. Providers don't order it up, and they often, and they're not getting an extensive panel. When you're 40, you should be getting at least once a year a really extensive panel that includes those key nodes, those inflammatory nodes, those oxidative stress nodes, those DNA damage, maybe telomere length nodes. So that's a lot of testing, but it's worth it. And you can really get a good snapshot of where you stand, especially considering that's when we see a key inflection point in physiological aging at 40. That's inflection point one, depending on the person, but yeah, generally speaking. A boring answer, but like it's understand your body and some lifestyle things.
this has been exactly what I was hoping for, a grounded science first conversation about something that affects every single person listening. For anyone who want to explore frame longevity or your work, where should they go?
Framelongevity.com, and you can see what we're up to there, or base longevity, which is here in Aspen for our on-site stuff.
I think what you're building with frame longevity is great. It sits at the intersection I find genuinely compelling. Rigorous science, real care delivery, and the kind of scale that AI can help enable. I would love to continue that conversation with you even off mic.